Have you ever wondered what personality type you are? I mean, it's so tempting, isn't it? Somehow makes you feel weirdly kind of special to be a Sagittarius or a 2 with wing 3 or agreeable, conscientious, and neurotic. I guess it's that combined magic of someone knowing you and saying mostly nice things about you and also belonging to a kind of tribe with all the people of the same type. Okay. No harm in that. And definitely we are all different. And there has to be some rhyme or reason to it. Personality isn't just an invention to sell you the horoscope. But what exactly is personality? Is it preference, like whether you like Chopin or Beyonce more? Is it traits, like whether you cry easily or not at all? Is it behavior, like getting up early in the morning or being more of a night owl? Or all of it? Of course, that would be an insane level of complexity, and then we might as well not explain or try to classify anything at all. So how do we tame that? How do we take that richness of difference and put it into a manageable amount of categories? Well, today I'll be introducing you to an approach to personality that you might not have heard of before, called objective personality. I'll be explaining the 4 concepts that it uses to build a system that is both precise and deep, and yet breaks down into only 11 categories. It's a quite recent take on Carl Jung's cognitive functions, in case you're familiar with those, but it adds some definite spice to it. So let's come back to the original question. What is personality? What purpose does it serve? And why do we have different personalities in the first place? One answer could be that evolutionarily it gives us an advantage. It allows us to perform a specialized role in the tribe, and specialization enhances group unity and efficiency. So if we assume that that's why we have different personalities, we'd mostly be looking at behavior, because behavior is what we do for the tribe. But that doesn't really reduce the complexity, does it? Behaviors aren't contained programs. They are varied and adapted to whatever environment they need to deal with, whether that is being an AI tech developer in Silicon Valley or a hunter in the Amazon rainforest. So really we're looking for something more fundamental that underlies behavior. The most basic functions that all behaviors on a very general level, of course, can be reduced to. Carl Jung suggested that all behaviors are based on 2 main functions that humans use to navigate the world. A function to process information, what's going on. He called this perceiving, but we'll go with objective personality and call it observing. And then a function to judge the best course of action and make the right decision. Carl Jung coined this judging, but we'll be calling it deciding. For example, you might be noticing that you've gained weight, and you also know your own history of trying to lose weight. Maybe you've heard of a new method using mindfulness, or you're considering the new wonder pill everyone is raving about. And now, as you decide what to do, you weigh whether you want to be the kind of person that takes the easy way out, and whether you should check what other people have done in the same situation. So every action will have some observing in it and some deciding. And in this example, we can also already see that while there are several observations to find the best option and ruminations about the best decision, there's a back and forth with where the attention goes, going from all available and especially new options to personal history, to the kind of person you want to be, to the judgment of other people. This, according to Ian McGilchrist, is one of the things our 2 brain hemispheres specialize in. They are responsible for where to put our attention. Our right hemisphere scans the world outwardly and broadly, what Carl Jung called extroverted. In observing, this means checking for unknown dangers, but also new opportunities. And in the case of deciding, that would be consulting other people to find the best decision. You can think of extroversion as an impersonal lens at your surroundings. It isn't about you, and it isn't about the things you find relevant. Rather, you pay attention to anything and everyone. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the very subjective and very personal attention that the left hemisphere is responsible for. This attention focuses narrowly and thus can be deeper, and its purpose is meant to be long-term. Carl Jung called this introverted. In the case of observing, that means narrowing down available information to what's relevant. In the case of deciding, that would be refining and standing upon one's own personal judgment. How does personality fit into this? Well, we all observe and decide, obviously, and we are all able to shift our attention from outward to personal and back. But we don't use these functions equally. We have preferences. Some of us luster just a little bit more for the new and undiscovered, while others prefer consistency and stability. For some of us, it's important that everyone in the group holds and is provided for equally. Others prefer following their own personal discernment and opinions. Sounds very abstract still? Don't worry. This is only meant as a brief overview, and we'll break down each of the functions a lot more in future videos. Of course, these 4 tendencies can't explain all human behaviors and quirks. They're too basic for that. But now that we have them, we can fine-tune them into more complex versions. Which brings me to the second concept underlying the system: granularity. Looking at two people who both seem to prefer observing, we might notice that their observing feels different. One seems to look at abstract patterns and what might be, hypothetically, possible in the future. Our little friend here, for example, might be speculating about what potential negative effects the pill could have that aren't known yet. Another person might look at the real world instead, what the facts are and what's actually happening. For a friend here, that might mean going with a clear, physical approach instead of relying on something invisible and unknown. Or two people prefer deciding, but their judgments seem based on different things. One seems to go by how they feel about something and what's valuable. For a friend here, that could mean that they go with what they like the most. Since they hate working out and feel good doing mindfulness, that's the one they choose. For another person, they need to have good reasons and act rationally. In the case of a friend, they need to know what works. Anything else would not make a lot of sense. That might still be the mindfulness approach, but they would track the results very closely. And we can take this granularity to an even deeper level. We might notice that somehow someone's observing or deciding feels more solid, almost aggressive, while someone else's, in comparison, feels fluid and movable. But not only can we fine-tune and add granularity, we can combine these functions like building blocks for more complex programs. After all, actions need both good information as well as good decision making, which brings us to composability. We can combine the preference for taking in new information with going by one's own personal judgment. This would then result in a kind of self-steered and self-driven learning program. If our friend had a preference for this program, they might actively explore the newest ways to lose weight, and they would pick the one they found the most convincing. Or we combine the need for narrowed down, relevant information with the preference to look to the tribe for guidance, a kind of teaching program. With a preference for this program, our friend would trust whatever method the tribe had already vetted for him. When we combine the focus on new information with wanting to know what everyone else thinks, we get a react and adapt to what's needed in the moment kind of program. Here, our friend would ask a bunch of people what they had lately tried, trusting the tribe but wanting the information to be cutting edge. And when we combine someone preferring focusing on relevant information guided by their own personal judgment, we find a long-term self-actualizing program. And with a preference for this program, our friend might just go back to what worked for them and what they learned from their own experience. But in any case, not feel the need to ask anyone else or find the newest fads. And we don't have to stop here either. We can then combine these more complex programs and increase the complexity to yet another level. Combining two opposite programs gives us a pair that is more focused on information and a pair that is more about implementation. Here we're combining neighbors, and here lower level functions to paint an even more complete picture. All of this already gives us a very powerful system that is both simple and that can, through granularity and composability, approach not only real world complexity but completeness. But there's one more attribute that makes the system strong. You probably already spotted it. Both the basic functions as well as the more complex programs have in common that they exist on a clearly defined binary axis, also called binary coin, that describes two opposites or two halves of a discrete whole. Why is this so important? For a couple of reasons. Since we're looking at one distinct context at a time, concerns can be clearly divided, and this means that the definitions for functions and programs can be clean and independent of each other. These clean definitions also mean that when we do find a behavior or a trait that we cannot explain with what we have, the whole system can be expanded with additional coins. This is how the system went from Carl Jung's 8 initial types to 16 in MBTI and now to 2048 in the objective personality system. And who knows, that might not even be the end of it. Another reason why this is so strong is that binary coins, because they're independent, can be figured out separately. And that means that even if you can't figure out every coin for a person, you'll still have meaningful information about the parts you do get. Now, binary coins do not mean that we only have access to one of its functions. We need all of the functions and programs to survive, because we'd be very vulnerable when randomly put in a situation that requires the functions we don't have. So instead, we should look at it as preferred functions, like a left and right hand. We're simply better at our preferred function because usually we use it more readily and have more experience with it. We feel responsible for it and also have a higher frustration tolerance when using it. It is our natural go-to function when a new problem arises or when a situation is particularly stressful, like a hammer that makes everything look like a nail at first. That does not mean, however, that we can't switch to our other hand if necessary, and in fact, as we age, we naturally discover and develop even our less preferred functions and programs. Of course, this leaves us with the question of how to figure out what type we and other people are. Instinctively, we would assume that personalities are determined through behavior, but I hope you're starting to catch on that functions are tools, not traits. and tools can be used for different purposes. And while certain behaviors will definitely cluster in certain types, it's always necessary to not just look at what someone is doing, but why. Their motivation, purpose, and strategy behind the behavior that gives us the actual function or program they're using. To give you 2 examples, we might be looking at 2 people reading lots of books, but one does it in the context of self-driven curiosity, the other because they are looking for the wisdom of the tribe. Another behavior might be to go to a party to mingle with people. One person does it because they're hungry for stimulation and meeting new people, another because they think that they should be a more sociable person and that it would be a good long-term investment to make more friends. So if you can't look at behavior and maybe the person in question isn't really aware of their motivations or strategies behind the behavior, or at least you don't have access to it, how do you reliably and objectively type? That of course needs its own kind of video, but to give you a brief summary, on this channel we'll be looking at how strategy or your function leaks out unconsciously often through language. So there you have it. This should have given you a brief overview of what the objective personality system consists of. More importantly though, it should have explained why it has an excellent foundation to break personality down. It's building on basic functions, it's using granularity and composability, and it's keeping to independent binary coins to create a system that is both flexible and precise. In the next videos, we'll go into more detail about what exactly these different coins entail and how you can use that information to look at yourself and others with more insight and hopefully also more compassion. And although it might seem counterintuitive, I don't recommend starting the series off learning the basic functions. I think they're quite abstract, and if you've never heard of any of this, you might not really get what these coins mean, even with more explanation and detail. Instead, let me entice you to look into something that has made it into popular culture in many different systems, and that's the thinking versus feeling coin. We'll be looking at it with a slightly sharper eye, aided by what we know so far in science about it, and I hope to make it clear why these 2 functions exist in the first place, how they make evolutionary sense, why they belong together, and how you can tell whether you or someone you know prefers one over the other. So I hope that made you curious to continue with the series and that we'll see each other in the next video.